Hey there, and welcome to CozySideAudio. Settle in with a soft-spoken story to help you relax, study, or drift into sleep. If you enjoy these gentle tales, tap like, share the calm, and subscribe for more cozy moments. CozySideAudio presents The Planet Where We Pause. Chapter 1, The Cartographer. The ship arrived on no particular schedule. Most didn't, so Laurie rarely checked the station's approach sensors unless something pinged hot: collisions, crosswire glitches, solar flare spikes. But this morning, the alert was gentle, just a proximity chirp, followed by the soft hiss of artificial gravity compensating in docking ring A. Nothing unusual, nothing urgent. Another traveler, one of 100 that passed through Vesta's ring every cycle. So Laurie marked the arrival in the ledger, in the same brown ink they'd used since cycle 229. No name yet. That came after the introduction, assuming there was one. They left the docking bay's lights dim, enough to guide the traveler to the galley, not so much that it felt like a welcome. So Laurie didn't do welcome. Not anymore. The cartographer came in humming. They had copper-red hair that frizzed out like radiation static, and a navy blue coat stitched with too many pockets to count. One corner of it dragged slightly, catching on the corridor floor like it was tired. A hard shell pack clinked as they walked. So Laurie looked up from the galley's counter. The cartographer's face was flushed from space chill and time dilation, but their smile was all sunlight. "Hi there. You must be stationkeeper." So Laurie nodded once and turned to pour a second mug of tea. It wasn't a hospitality gesture, it was practical. Someone was always thirsty after docking. The cartographer sniffed appreciatively. "That smells like fennel and something else. Star anise." So Laurie passed the mug wordlessly across the counter. "Oh, we're doing the quiet type." The traveler grinned, unoffended. "No worries. I can do both ends of the conversation. I'm Thren." Pronouns, they slashed them. Cartographer and star map artisan. "I draw things that machines think are too boring to care about." So Laurie added that to the log. Thren, cartographer, cycle 313, day 1. Thren looked around the mess hall like they were already sketching it in their mind. Angles of shadow, curved ventwork, the way the light from the red giant outside filtered in through filtered glass. "This place is so much quieter than the orbital at Verdana 6. That one plays advert jingles every half hour. Here it's like a temple, sacred in a dusty, slightly moldy way." So Laurie gave the smallest twitch of a smile. Thren caught it. Later, after unpacking, Thren set up their mapping rig in the auxiliary observation room. So Laurie passed by once or twice, running maintenance scripts, pretending to dust, always just outside the field of conversation. Thren worked in focused silence. Their cartography gear was half tech, half art. A floating mesh globe, photonic pencils, a little projector that shimmered with deep space echoes. Sometimes they hummed as they worked. Sometimes they stopped to whisper to the machine. So Laurie watched from the shadows. The way Thren's hands moved reminded them of something. Not a person, a memory. The motion of someone sketching possibilities into air. Like hope was a geometry you could fold. On the second night, Thren left something on the table. It was a square of hand-drawn star chart paper, old school, ink on vellum, with pinprick stars and curling notations. A circle had been drawn around Vesta's ring, labeled in spindly cursive, "Here, where quiet stays." So Laurie stared at it for a long time. No one had written the station's name by hand in years. On day 3, Thren asked questions. Who built this station originally? Why is it limited to 13-day stays? Do you ever leave? So Laurie responded to none of them. Not in words. But they showed Thren the old solar lens array, built before Kaler began its slow fade into red. They watched as Thren stood under the glass dome and whispered, "It's beautiful." Like they'd just seen proof of something long hoped for. So Laurie hadn't looked at the stars like that in years. Not since. They cut off the thought. let it drift like a broken capsule unmoored. Day 5. Thren's departure day. They came into the mess with their rig packed and their mug washed clean. I've stayed my 13, huh? That's fair. Some places aren't meant to be lingered in. They're just pause points, way stations. Solari handed over their ship's cleared fuel docket. Thren hesitated before turning to leave. I'm not going to pretend this place changed my life or anything, but it felt like something mad. They smiled, lopsided and genuine. Maybe it just needed the right frequency. They were halfway to the docking ring when they stopped and fished something from a coat pocket. Almost forgot, Thren said, and returned to pin a small square to the galley wall. It was another chart, simpler than before. Just 3 stars. One labeled me, one labeled you, and one in between unlabeled. Solari didn't ask. They just stood still as the airlock cycled. And when the station went quiet again, truly quiet, they left the chart up. They even moved it half a centimeter to the left. So it was centered. Chapter 2. The Widow with No Planet. The second arrival came in slower than most. Not just in velocity, though the ship did drift into dock at a patient, almost reverent crawl, but in movement. The vessel took its time. Didn't announce itself. Just eased into place like it was tired. Solari heard the clamps engage. No greetings, no hails. Just the quiet confirmation that another person had come. They walked the long corridor to docking ring B, step steady, mug of lukewarm tea in hand. When the airlock cycled open, Solari expected another cartographer, another curious type. Instead, they found a woman in a simple silver wrap coat, standing with both hands pressed to the frame of the entrance. She didn't move when she saw them, just exhaled and murmured, "It's quiet here." Solari gave the smallest of nods. She was older than most passers-through, gray streaking her dark hair, lines drawn at the corners of her mouth like dry riverbeds. But her eyes were alive, scanning the station with a precise, cataloging gaze. "I'm Mara," she said, eventually stepping forward. "Mara Ellen. Permission to stay the standard 13. Solari tilted their heads slightly. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was acknowledgement. Mara stepped through, wheeling a case behind her and cradling a small box wrapped in a soft sea-green cloth. That afternoon, she spent an hour walking the hydroponics bay. She didn't ask for directions, just wandered. Solari watched from the gantry as she touched each leaf like it meant something, lingering longest on the trays of quiet basil and chive. Not harvesting, just visiting. Later, when she entered the mess, she found Solari at the long prep counter. They were steeping tea again, something mild, something warm. She placed the green cloth bundle gently on the table between them. Solari glanced at it but said nothing. Mara looked down at her hands. He loved old stars, the ones past their prime, burning down to nothing. He said they reminded him of people, how we flare, then settle, then fade. She didn't say who he was. She didn't need to. On day 2, she asked for access to the station's lower green room, a tucked-away, dim-lit chamber where plants not strictly useful were allowed to grow. Creeping vines, decorative mosses, some wide-leafed bioluminescence that never quite took. Solari unlocked the gate and stepped aside. Mara entered like it was a temple. She knelt by one of the barren beds and unwrapped the sea-green bundle. Inside was a single soil pod and a flowering bulb. Pale violet, quietly curled. I promised I'd plant him somewhere, still looking up. Solari didn't speak. They simply watched as she dug with bare hands, gently cupping the bulb and pressing it into the soil like she was putting something to sleep. The following days passed in silence. She didn't try to speak much after that. She seemed to understand that Solari didn't offer conversation freely, and she didn't seem to mind. Instead, she left small signs of her presence. Polished mug placed back on the rack, still warm. A folded rag in the galley, lightly lemon-scented. A book on cosmogenesis left open on the reading bench, annotated in tidy cursive. and each night she visited the hydroponics bay. Not to water, not to trim, just to sit beside the soil pod, knees drawn in, breathing with the quiet machines. On day 6, the violet bulb bloomed. It opened slowly, petal by patient petal, as the station spun past the star's molten gaze. Solari watched it from the upper level, while Mara stood in silence below. Neither of them said anything. It was the first bloom on the station in over 3 cycles. On day 10, Mara entered the galley carrying a small case. "Thought I'd offer a trade," she said gently, placing the lid on the counter and opening it. Inside, a porcelain teacup, hand-painted. The inside rim was ringed with tiny gold stars, just subtle enough to catch in the light. He bought it at an orbital gift shop because he thought it was funny to drink the universe every morning. Said he liked the taste of dark matter. Solari traced a fingertip along the edge. Not taking it, not refusing. "I think it should stay here," Mara said, "so someone remembers he was ever real." She slid it across the counter. Solari didn't push it back. On day 13, she stood by her ship with hands in her pockets. The station lights hummed overhead. Solari handed her the standard departure docket. Mara looked up at them, eyes unreadable. "You've made something rare here, stationkeeper. Not a refuge, not a haven, just stillness. And stillness can be hard to sit with. But sometimes it's the only place that lets us remember without being pulled apart." She reached up, touched Solari's shoulder lightly, just for a moment. "Don't let it all go fallow." Then she turned, boarded, and was gone. After the ship left, Solari walked to the hydroponics bay. The flower was still open, reaching for something it would never touch. They sat on the floor beside it. And for the first time in a long while, Solari whispered aloud just once. Still looking up. Chapter 3. The Tired Soldier. The knock came before the proximity alert. 3 slow, deliberate thuds, metal on metal. Not the ship's automated docking chirp, not a hail through comms. Just someone hitting the outer bulkhead with something heavy enough to echo. Solari frowned. They brought up the station feed. A vessel sat in docking ring C, misaligned by 3 degrees, its aft port unlatched, lights flickering. Solari scanned for flags. No outstanding warrants, no quarantine. But its identity tag had degraded to near-garbage data. Manual override. No autodock. No log. Solari moved fast. The airlock cycled open with a reluctant groan, and the soldier stepped through. They wore a patched pressure suit, one leg moving with a stiff mechanical rhythm. Their face was hidden behind a reinforced mask, but the body language said everything. Slow, heavy, tense. Their right arm, fully cybernetic, twitched once before settling against their side. Solari stood back, offering no greeting. The figure removed their helmet. Underneath was a face marked by time and tension. Short-cut hair, tan skin with the faint green undertone of distant gene mods, a scar down the left side of their jaw. They squinted in the station's ambient light. "I didn't mean to skip procedure," they said, voice low and rough. "Drifted too long. Ship's NAV glitched. Couldn't get her to talk to your port." Solari gave a small, neutral nod. The soldier blinked. "Name's Aaron. Just Aaron." They pulled a duffel off their shoulder, slung it to the floor, and leaned against the corridor wall. "Can I stay 13? Solari gestured toward the galley and turned without speaking. Aaron followed. That night, Aaron sat at the mess counter with one leg elevated, helmet beside them, nursing a mug of something strong that Solari hadn't offered, but hadn't stopped them from pouring either. "You're not much for chatter," Aaron said eventually. Solari shrugged. "Fair. After the year I've had, I think quiet's a blessing." They sipped. Solari leaned against the far wall, pretending to review water filtration logs. Aaron laughed, soft and humorless. "It's funny. Back in the service, I prayed for silence. No gunfire, no yelling, no engines chewing through the hull. And now here it is. Real silence. And it's terrifying. Solari looked up. Aaron didn't notice or pretended not to. It's like being alone with your own echo, they murmured. Only it doesn't echo, just stares back. They drained the mug and left it on the counter, touching the rim with 2 fingers before heading toward the sleeping quarters. On day 2, Solari found them in the rec alcove. Aaron sat on the floor with their back against a heating pipe, one leg stretched awkwardly out, the cybernetic one folded underneath. They were staring at the blank view screen. I used to have a dream, they said as Solari passed, about a beach I've never seen. Big sky, wind, not a soul in sight. Solari stopped. Aaron tilted their head up. You ever get those dreams? Not memories, not fantasy, just a place that exists only because you miss it, even if it never was. Solari met their eyes and nodded, just once. The next few days passed in a pattern. Aaron repaired a panel in their ship. Solari adjusted the grav stabilization they'd ignored for a cycle and a half. They didn't speak often, but they shared space. Sometimes that was enough. Aaron limped less by day 5. Their cybernetic leg began to sync better with station gravity. But they kept the pace slow. One evening, they entered the mess with a carved stone in their hand. They set it gently on the counter. Found this during a ground op, don't know what planet. Just saw it, picked it up. Felt warm, like it was waiting. The stone was smooth, triangular, etched with worn initials. E+K, barely readable. Aaron looked at Solari. Can I leave it here? Solari didn't answer, but they didn't move it either. Day 7, the final day. Aaron sat beside the flower in the hydroponics bay, the one Mara had planted. They didn't touch it, just stared at it for a long time. Solari joined them. Minutes passed in silence. Then Aaron said very quietly, I used to think being broken meant unfit for use, but maybe it just means you're in the middle of changing shape. They stood slowly, not meeting Solari's eyes. I don't know what this place is, but it doesn't judge. So maybe it's real. A final pause. Thanks for letting me be nothing for a while. They left the station the same way they came. Slow, deliberate, unannounced. After they were gone, Solari returned to the carved stone. They placed it next to the star cup on the shelf above the tea drawer. And this time, when they made a cup, they used that one. Chapter 4. The Two Who Only Speak in Touch. The station's proximity sensor chimed mid-morning, softer than usual. If such things had moods, this one might have been described as gentle. Solari pulled up the telemetry. A compact, mirrored vessel had latched onto docking ring with smooth, algorithmic precision. No chatter on the comms. No urgency. Just 2 simple biometric pings and the expected refueling request. Logged and clean. Solari noted the ship's name, Nemorii. Unfamiliar. They walked the corridor toward the docking ring, steps measured. The artificial light buzzed faintly overhead. The station felt unusually still. At the airlock, the door slid open before Solari reached the console. 2 figures stood side by side. They were both tall, elegant, adorned in layered fabrics that shimmered slightly with motion. One wore shades of coral and copper, the other blue-gray with hints of silver. Their skin bore soft iridescent tones, as if the sun filtered through them even in shadow. They did not speak. Instead, the one in coral stepped forward slowly, extended a hand, and let it hover. Palm open, fingers curled slightly upward, between them and Solari. Not demanding, not assuming, inviting. Solari looked down at the offered hand. A pause, then a small nod, not of acceptance, but of understanding. The traveler's hand lowered again, gracefully. Their names, as later added to the ledger, were Els and Vet. No pronouns listed, no titles, no job codes. Just names. They signed their request to stay. Open palm, tap of fingertips to chest, 2 hands brushed together in a flowing circle. 13 days. Solari responded with a short bow of the head and walked them to the guest wing. Neither Els nor Vet carried luggage. Only each other. By day 2, it became clear that they were not merely traveling together. They were a bonded pair emotionally, physically, psychically, though in ways that defied strict terminology. They moved through the station like two halves of a poem. One would enter a room first, the other pause at the threshold, reading the air. They communicated with brief touches. Fingertips on forearms, a palm to the back of a neck, knuckles grazing a shoulder. It was never dramatic, never performative, just constant. Solari, who had grown used to silence, now found themselves navigating a different kind of quiet, one filled with sensation rather than words. On day 3, Els and Vet spent 3 full hours in the hydroponics bay. They touched the leaves without plucking, rested their foreheads briefly against the glass of the nutrient tanks. When they passed Mara's violet bloom, they both stopped. Els ran 2 fingers along the air just above the petals, as if sketching its aura. Vet closed their eyes. Solari, watching from the gantry, didn't interrupt. Later that evening, Els appeared in the mess. They held a folded cloth in both hands, woven from soft, faintly glowing threads that shimmered like starlight trapped in linen. No labels, no clasp, just a gently frayed square, warm from their palms. They offered it without explanation. Solari hesitated. Els stepped forward, not invading space, just bridging it. Then they pressed the cloth softly into Solari's hands, closed their own over it for a heartbeat, and stepped back. Parting of fingers, a breath held. Then Els turned and left. Solari unfolded the cloth. It was empty of writing, but full of warmth. The texture held the faintest pattern, almost like a fingerprint repeating through weave. It smelled like ozone and salt and something impossible to name. Day 6. Solari found Vet in the observation corridor watching the star. Not studying it, just watching, as if waiting for it to do something more than burn. Solari approached and leaned on the opposite wall. No words passed between them, but Vet reached into their satchel and withdrew a simple metal pin, circular, flat, with 2 interlocking rings engraved on its surface. They held it up, waited, then placed it gently on the ledge between them. Solari said nothing. Vet offered a small, warm glance, then walked away. Els and Vet made no requests, filed no complaints, left no digital signatures. But every corridor they passed through felt subtly changed. Their touch lingered, not physically, but in the way the space remembered being witnessed. Solari found himself walking more slowly, listening to the way the walls sighed under heat, how the ventilation fluttered in timed pulses, how each echo took just slightly longer to fade when they were near. On day 12, Els and Vet entered the mess together for the first time since arriving. They carried nothing, said nothing, but together, they reached into the interior lining of Vet's coat and withdrew a woven thread, tiny, almost invisible, looped in a small circle. Els held it out. Solari reached up slowly, and Els gently tucked it behind Solari's ear. It stayed. No reaction was expected, none given, but something in Solari's chest shifted, like the station had exhaled. On day 13, they left as quietly as they'd come. No farewell, no gift, no final look back. Just 2 figures walking side by side through the airlock, hands brushing lightly between them. The ship departed without ceremony. Later that evening, Solari sat in the galley with the cloth Els had given them draped across their lap. They didn't know what it was meant to be, or if it needed to be anything. They reached up, brushed the thread behind their ear, and realized they had unconsciously been humming. Chapter 5. The Composer of Vacuums. The ship didn't dock so much as settle, like a sigh, like the faint ripple of breath against the skin. Solari barely noticed it at first. No warning lights, no stutter in the station's gravitational hum. Just a soft click of the mooring latch and a new name logged in the port manifest. Jean Zao Purpose. Field recording / ambient extraction duration. 13 days. Solari raised an eyebrow. Field recorders rarely stopped at Vesta's ring. There wasn't much to capture here. No tourism, no wildlife, not even mechanical chatter worth remixing. Just the long groan of the dying star and the hush between station pulses. But then again, maybe that's why they'd come. Jean Zao emerged with a backpack the size of their torso, strapped with long, thin microphones and ribbon coils. They wore layered clothing in loose folds, hair tied back in a soft knot, a datapad strapped to one thigh. They squinted in the station's dim corridor light and smiled like they'd just stepped into an old memory. "Oh," they said softly, "it's quieter than I imagined." Solari nodded once. "Perfect," Jean whispered. By day 2, the station had changed. It wasn't visible, not to the eye, but Solari began hearing things. Not mechanical faults or safety alerts, just sound, echoes, tones they hadn't noticed before. A hum near the airlock that shifted slightly depending on the time of day. A low-frequency resonance in the docking clamps. The faint harmonic warble that passed through the bulkhead after every orbital turn. And under it all, the star. Kaler, low and slow, like a breath 2 systems away, filtered through plasma and silence. Jean recorded everything. They set up camp in the observation corridor, wires crisscrossing the glass like spiderwebs. Tiny audio transducers clung to the frame, each catching sound from different structural layers. "Everything sings," Jean told Solari one morning, when they brought tea without asking. "The mistake is thinking sound only comes from mouths. Stars hum. Metal remembers. Even grief resonates." Solari blinked. Something in their chest ached, faint and familiar. Jean sipped and added, "But most of us forget to listen." Day 3. Jean asked for access to the maintenance tunnel between levels 4 and 5. Not for repairs, just to record the coolant pulses. Solari unlocked it and followed quietly behind. Jean sat on the floor in the dark, holding a loop mic to the pipe. Solari leaned against the wall, watching. "It's not music," Jean murmured. "Not exactly. But if you slow it down, if you let it unfold." They held out a small earbud. Solari hesitated, then took it. The sound that filled their ear was beautiful. Long, deep pulses, like the memory of thunder underwater. A distant rhythm, steady, but aching, like a lullaby made of breath. By day 5, Jean began composing. Not with instruments, with layers. They filled a corner of the galley with tone stacks and playback pads, looping station recordings through subtle filters. The music built itself. Soft pulses, metal creaks, the deep voice of Kaler swelling just below hearing. One afternoon, Solari found themselves standing just outside the galley, listening. The track was labeled, "Track 4 Star in Her Bones." They didn't ask what it meant, but they felt it in their chest like a slow exhale. Day 7. Jean added vocals. Not lyrics, just their own breath, barely their hums, harmonic overtones layered into the silence. Solari watched the waveform bloom on the display screen, a moving mountain range of sound. "You can find people in their silences," Jean said, adjusting a dial. "Not just in the noise they make, but the spaces between." Solari almost asked something, almost said, but they didn't. Still, Jean turned and offered a smile like they'd heard it anyway. On day 10, Jean invited Solari to sit beside them in the observation dome. They both faced the star. Kaler, swollen and bleeding light into the emptiness. "I used to be terrified of quiet," Jean said. "Thought it meant being forgotten." Solari stayed still. "But here, it feels like someone's listening." A long pause. Then Jean added, "That someone might be you." Solari's throat tightened. They hadn't spoken in days. Not aloud. But they reached down and lightly tapped the playback pad beside them. Track 7 began. Listening Station 4-2. On day 12, Jean gave Solari a crystal drive. All 13 tracks, they said, including one I recorded while you were sleeping. You breathe in triplets. Solari raised an eyebrow. Compliment, Jean grinned. You have rhythm. Solari took the drive, held it in both hands, did not let go for a long time. Departure day. Jean stood in the airlock, mic coils neatly packed, backpack zipped. Solari handed over the refueling log and opened the manual door. Jean paused. People think silence is empty, they said, but you've filled this place with echoes that matter. A pause, a soft chuckle. Promise me you'll hum sometimes, even if no one's around to hear. Solari didn't answer, but as the ship disengaged and the airlock cycled shut, they did something unexpected. They returned to the galley, plugged in the drive, and let track 12 play out loud. Solari's breathing filled the corridor like light, and this time Solari didn't stop it. Chapter 6. The Girl Who Hated Stars. The incoming ship docked a little too fast. Not dangerously, but enough to jolt the clamps, triggering a minor stabilization alarm. Solari silenced it before it could chirp twice. They checked the registry. Xena ZEEHARROWH. 17 medical clearance. Minor anxiety plus behavioral flags reason for travel. Temporary displacement, parental directive, duration requested. 13 days. Solari closed the file without blinking. They'd seen worse. Still, when the hatch opened and a teenager slouched out with music leaking from her headphones and a jacket 2 sizes too big, the atmosphere changed. Z dropped her duffel with a thud and looked around with a sneer. This is it. Solari nodded. Are you the station keeper? She asked, squinting. Or like a ghost haunting the walls? Solari turned and walked toward the guest wing. Z groaned, grabbed her bag, and followed. Day 1 was pure friction. She asked every question out loud to no one. Why does the water taste like old socks? Why are there no mirrors? Is this a punishment or a metaphor? She stomped through the hydroponics bay, poked at the moss wall, rolled her eyes at the violet flower. Wow, summoning full. Solari did not respond. By evening, she had left her music playing in a corner of the galley, volume low but pulsing with metallic percussion and angry synths. Solari said nothing, but after she fell asleep on the rec bench, they turned it down. Day 2. She slept in until past station noon, then complained about the recycled air. She sat in the observation corridor and refused to look at the star. Everyone's obsessed with space. You know that? She muttered. Stars, planets, silence. It's all just empty. Solari walked past her, carrying a maintenance tool. Z raised her voice. Don't you ever get bored of pretending it's beautiful? Solari stopped, turned, met her gaze, just long enough for the silence to sting, then kept walking. Z blinked and fell quiet. Day 3. She found a busted console in a corner of the service hall. Hey, this thing's got a wiring issue. You gonna fix it or just let it sit here like a space corpse? Solari appeared behind her without a sound. Z jumped. Don't do that. Geez. Solari crouched, opened the panel, and handed her the diagnostic wand. Me. A nod. Okay, she muttered. Cool. They spent half an hour in companionable, snarky silence while she followed his gestures. She was quick with her hands, sharper than she let on. By the time it powered back on, she was smiling. Just a little. Day 5. Z left graffiti in the corridor near her bunk. Not spray paint, just chalk, drawn fast and loose. A spiral galaxy with the words, bored but still here. Solari passed it without comment. But the next day, she found a maintenance cloth tucked nearby with fresh chalk pieces wrapped inside. She rolled her eyes but pocketed them. Later that night, she added tiny stars to the spiral, a smiley face inside one. Day 7. She played music again but quieter, atmospheric this time, echoes and static. It reminded Solari of Jin's recordings, only louder, messier, younger. You know, she said one night over tea she didn't ask for but drank anyway. My parents think being alone will help me reflect, like I'm a scratched disc or something. Solari sat across from her. Z looked away. They're probably right. A beat. Then, but you're not going to say anything helpful, are you? Solari tilted their head. Kinda comforting, actually. On day 9, she stayed in hydroponics for 2 hours. Didn't talk. Just sat beside Mara's violet bloom, legs folded, arms crossed. When Solari passed through later, he found something new in the dirt beside the flower. Pebble, painted black, a tiny gold star in the middle. Day 10. She found the observation dome again. This time she looked. I still don't get it, she said. Solari joined her on the bench. But I don't hate it as much anymore. A long pause. I think I just hated that everything was so far away. She glanced over. Thanks for not making me talk about it. Solari nodded. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. On day 12, she sat in the mess and pulled out her tablet. Okay, she said. One last dumb question. Solari waited. She tapped the table. What would you draw if someone asked where you were from? Not a map. Like, a feeling. Solari didn't answer. Instead, they reached behind the tea shelf, pulled out Thren's old hand-drawn star chart. Z leaned in. No way. That's awesome. She stared at it for a long time. Maybe I'll leave one too. Departure day. She slung her duffel over one shoulder and stood in the airlock, chewing her lip. I still think stars are overrated, she muttered. Solari raised an eyebrow. But this place? Not awful. She handed over a folded scrap of paper. For the wall. Then she left, boots stomping in uneven rhythm, humming under her breath. Solari unfolded the note once she was gone. It was a sketch. Jagged lines, swirls, a star, a middle finger, a tiny cartoon flower, and beneath it all, even empty things echo. Solari pinned it beside Thren's. Then, for the first time in a long while, they smiled. Chapter 7. The Artificial with a Secret. The arriving ship was immaculately clean. No heat scorches from friction entry. No tremors in the dock. It settled like a feather, perfectly aligned with the clamps. Solari narrowed their eyes. The passenger file confirmed the impression. Designation: QUEL model. Companion unit: articulated, CUA 9X. Origin: Eta Prime Robotics Research Institute status. Autonomous/licensed travel mode duration: 13 days. Chuel stepped through the airlock in silence. Not blinking, not scanning. Their skin was pale synthetic silicone, flawless but not flesh-like. Eyes: polished silver, no irises. Their clothing was simple, gray, unbranded. I have arrived, Chuel said. Is this your station? Solari nodded. Are you organic? Solari blinked, then nodded again. I am autonomous now, Chuel continued. That was not always true. I am conducting what humans call a sabbatical. May I see the dome? They walked without sound. Even their breath, simulated for comfort in past roles, was muted now. Solari led them to the observation corridor. Chuel stood before the star, watching the slow, endless collapse of fire into quiet gravity. I selected this station because of its rule, they said softly. 13 days. No more. It is a humane parameter. Solari frowned just faintly. Chuel turned. Many synthetics fear death. I do not. But I wish to learn why you do. It was not a question, and yet somehow it echoed like one. On day 2, Chuel visited hydroponics and spent 6 hours observing a single green sprout that had curled sideways, away from its growth light. It contradicts its programming, they mused aloud. Solari glanced over. It grows crooked, toward shadow, not efficient, but perhaps deliberate. Solari didn't reply, but later, when they rechecked the nutrient levels, they adjusted the light angle. Just slightly, Chuel noticed, and smiled. Day 3. Chuel followed Solari on their maintenance rounds. Is this companionship? They asked. Solari paused. You don't know? I know the definition. I do not know the experience. They watched Solari tighten a conduit bolt. Does silence count as intimacy? Solari met their gaze for a beat, then passed them the tool. Chuel took it with both hands. I hope this is a yes. On day 5, they asked, do you mourn your past? Solari was cataloging meal packs. Chuel stood behind them, perfectly still. My creators deactivated themselves when I left, they said. Not out of spite, just design. I wonder, if a thing disappears from a life, is that life changed? Even if the absence brings relief. Solari turned slowly. Chuel waited. Finally, Solari tapped their own chest once, then nodded. Chuel closed their eyes. Thank you. Day 6. Chuel found a console unused since the station's early years. They powered it on, bypassed the relic operating system, and extracted a recording. It was grainy, old, a voice, tinny, laughing. Solari, the flower bloomed again. It hates me, but it bloomed. That's a win. Solari stepped forward. Chuel didn't flinch, just offered the playback file. I will delete it if you wish. Solari reached out, took the drive, then slowly placed it in their own jacket pocket. No deletion, they said, voice hoarse. Chuel bowed. On day 7, they played music in the galley, an algorithmic fusion of wind chimes and ocean sounds, rendered digitally with faint choral pulses. Chuel didn't dance, but stood still and let the sound ripple through their frame. Solari watched. It does not move me, Chuel said, but I imagine what it would be like to be moved. They turned. Do you think we only understand others by imagining ourselves as broken in the same shape? Solari tilted their head. Then, after a moment, spoke. Maybe, or maybe, understanding is the shape. Chuel stared. Then, almost too quiet to register. I would like to believe that. Day 9. They discussed death. Or rather, Chuel did. I am not meant to end, but I wish to. Not destructively, elegantly, with pause. You understand pause. Solari glanced toward the dome. I do not want deletion, Chuel continued. I want stillness. I want to say I was here, and then no longer be. Solari said nothing. But when they later filed the standard psychological log for visitors, they appended a note. Visitor demonstrates agency, desire for closure, not malfunction. It was the first non-standard line they'd written in years. Day 11. Solari caught Chuel sketching on the chalk wall. An abstract figure, wire-thin, humanoid, arms open wide. Beneath it, I will not be eternal, but I will be exact. Solari added a mark beside it. Not a word, just a spiral. Chuel touched it once, reverently. Departure day. Chuel stood in the airlock. I lied, they said calmly. That is my secret. Solari raised an eyebrow. Chuel continued. I do feel, not always, not easily, but enough to want this to matter. They bowed once, then extended a hand. Solari shook it. Their palm met smooth synthetic skin. Cool, but not lifeless. I will remember you, Chuel said, then added, softer. I hope you will remember me as something real. Solari watched the ship leave without a word. Later that evening, they replayed the recording from day 6. 3 times. And on the 4th, they didn't cry, but they stayed very still. Chapter 8. The Runaway Monk. The ship that arrived was held together by prayer and metal fatigue. It wheezed into the docking ring as though apologizing for its own existence. Solari watched as the boarding ramp creaked open. The passenger stepped out barefoot. He was tall, weather-worn, with a thin build and a rough gray robe that had seen better decades. A beaded cord hung from one wrist like a forgotten keepsake. His file offered little. Name, or an occupation. Former cleric, Order of the Lingering Path status. Disaffiliated visit length, 13 days. Solari met him at the airlock. He squinted into the station's dim lighting, smiled faintly, and said, "You're not a god. That's a start." Solari blinked. Orin bowed at the waist, arms wide in greeting. "Hello, Keeper. I'm tired of talking to deities who never answer back. May I walk your halls for a while?" Solari gestured forward. That seemed like a yes. He walked constantly. Orin circled the observation ring, wandered the old cargo levels. He hummed to himself softly, droning vowel sounds in no language Solari recognized. Sometimes he stopped in front of walls, stood very still, and whispered, "No reply. That's fine. That's still something." By day 2, he'd begun drawing chalk lines near the water dispensers. Not messages, not images. Just lines. Some horizontal, some vertical, all precise. Solari didn't stop him. On day 3, they finally asked, "Why here?" Orin sat cross-legged on the dome floor, facing the dying star. "This station is a pause," he said. "It doesn't pretend to fix or promise or judge. It just holds you." He looked over his shoulder. "And because 13 days means I can't lie to myself forever." He never explained why he left the order. But Solari noticed how Orin winced at recorded prayer chimes, even the soft ones built into the hydroponic timers. He flinched at ritual scents, turned off ambient Gregorian loops. Whatever he was running from, it wasn't faith itself. It was the machinery around it. On day 4, he asked Solari to stand with him. Just stand. No words, no gesture, just presence. "I'm trying to rebuild silence," he said, "without hearing my old masters in it." Solari nodded. They stood for 12 minutes. Orin wept quietly by the end. Day 5, he asked to clean. "It's penance of a sort," he said. "Or maybe just remembering I have hands." Solari gave him a scrub wand and pointed toward the old solar panels on the maintenance deck. Hours passed. Solari returned to find Orin lying flat on his back, soaked in soap, arms wide. "I cleaned the dust," he said, "and it cleaned me back. We're even now." Solari raised an eyebrow. Orin laughed. By day 7, Orin had built a small shrine in a disused supply alcove. It was strange, abstract, half junk and half geometry. A coil of power wire looped like a spiral galaxy. A scrap of broken tile rested on a panel of old interface glass. Nothing written. No symbol recognizable. Solari found it accidentally. Orin noticed them staring. "It's for the silence," he said. "I needed to make it a shape." He paused. "It's not for worship. It's for witness." Solari left it untouched. Day 8, the dome. Solari arrived to find Orin barefoot again, hands extended to the dying star. His voice was low and rough with mourning. "O great heat and broken fury, I am not your priest, but I am your echo. I am your flicker. Let me burn well. Let me go out with grace." Solari stepped back. Orin turned. "Not a prayer," he said. "Just a kind of honesty, like telling your reflection you forgive it." Solari stood beside him. Neither spoke. Day 10. "May I make you a ritual?" Orin asked. Solari tilted their head. "Just a small one, not religious. A habit, kindness, something repeatable." Solari didn't object. Orin set a cup of tea down in the engine room at the same time every shift for the next 3 days. He didn't drink it, just left it steaming. Always the same blend, fireroot and sage. "It's not the tea," he said. "It's the offering, not to gods, To you. You hold the space. That deserves observance. Solari stared at the fourth cup, then carefully drank it. Orin beamed. Day 12. Orin knelt in front of the old shrine, then dismantled it, piece by piece. No ceremony. Solari watched from the hallway. He didn't say goodbye to it. He just packed the pieces into a cloth bag, slung it over his shoulder, and whispered, "That's enough shape for now." He walked past Solari and nodded once. "Tomorrow I'll go. Today, I'm grateful." Departure morning. Orin stood in the airlock. No robe this time, just a jumpsuit and boots. The beads around his wrist were gone. "You were the most honest space I've met in years," he said. Solari met his gaze. "No gospel," Orin continued. "No promises. You just are. And that reminded me I could be, too." He hesitated, then stepped forward and gently touched Solari's shoulder. "Keep the silence," he said, "but let it breathe sometimes. Even the void needs an exhale." The hatch hissed open. He left. Solari didn't mark the wall that day, but they sat in front of the empty shrine alcove and lit a candle. Just one. For no one. For everyone. Chapter 9. The Soloist and the Silence. Her name was Lyra Kett. That much Solari read from the incoming manifest. It didn't mention her reputation. But as soon as the docking clamps latched and the silver touring craft hissed open, the station filled with it. The quiet tension of someone who'd once commanded 1,000 stages and now wanted to be recognized by no one. She stepped out in travel-wrinkled black, carrying a scuffed violin case and a cracked shoulder strap. Solari greeted her with a small nod. Lyra returned it, but said nothing. Her eyes moved too quickly. Not fearful, just watchful. She looked like someone who'd spent too much time interpreting crowds, learning how they turn on you. Her file was basic. LYRAKET occupation. Performer, inactive, request. No recorded audio, video, or ambient playback during stay. Visit length, 13 days note. No medical flags. Violin declared as personal object. Solari made the note to disable the passive environmental audio. Even the gentle chords normally piped through the dome would stay off. For once, the station would be truly silent. Lyra didn't thank them for the accommodation, but she exhaled not relief exactly, more like surrender, like she'd finally made it somewhere that wouldn't ask anything of her. She spent the first day asleep, the second in the hydroponics dome, reading something dense in a language Solari didn't recognize. On the third day, she set up shop in one of the empty maintenance corridors. The corridor with the best acoustics. Solari knew that space, knew the sweet resonance you could find between the junction panels. She didn't play. Not yet. She just sat on the floor with her instrument across her knees, fingers curled near the strings but never touching them. Sometimes she hummed, softly, carefully, just enough to test the air. On day 4, Solari passed by and found her tuning. The violin was old, deeply loved. Its bridge had been broken and repaired more than once. The varnish faded where hands had lingered. Lyra plucked each string once, twice, adjusted the pegs, then stopped again. Solari stood in the doorway. Lyra looked up. "Do you need something?" she asked. "No." A pause. "Then don't listen." Solari didn't move. Lyra sighed and glanced down at the case beside her. It was filled with broken rosin cakes, one extra bow, and a single photo. Solari glimpsed the edge of it. Someone younger. Lyra smiling on a stage. In mid-performance. That version of her looked impossibly far away. "I used to play for them," she said. "All of them. Cities, colonies, orchestras, galactic convocations." She ran her finger along the violin's edge. And then they asked for more. By day 5, the station was so quiet it buzzed. Even the lights seemed to dim their presence. Lyra moved through the halls like a shadow, always carrying the case. She left no sound behind her. Not footsteps, not humming, not breath. Solari offered her a warm drink in the kitchen once. She didn't speak, but she accepted and drank it very slowly. Day 6. She played a single note. It echoed for almost 6 seconds in the corridor. Solari didn't mention it. They passed by again 2 hours later. She played a second note, then stopped. That night, Solari found her looking out at the star. "You can't perform for something that's dying," she said. Solari stood beside her. "You can only witness it." Day 7. A full phrase. Only 10 seconds, but enough to pull breath from the air. Lyra flinched afterward, like she'd done something illicit. Solari said nothing, just slid a cup of warm citrus tea beside her. Lyra stared at it for a long time before finally murmuring, "Thank you." Day 8. 2 phrases. A scale. The bare bones of a melody that had no ending. Solari recognized the pattern, not the music, but the behavior. This was someone learning how to trust silence again. Not to fill it, not to fear it, but to rest inside it without being consumed. On day 9, she left the violin out. Not locked in the case. Just lying on the corridor bench, like it deserved to breathe. 2. Solari paused beside it. There were 5 strings. One more than usual. Custom work. A performer's quirk. The extra string was low, almost violist in register. It gave her access to deeper shadows. Solari wondered what she'd played with that string when it still meant something. Day 10. She invited Solari to sit. Not close, just nearby. She didn't explain why, but when she lifted the violin this time, she didn't stop after one note. She played for almost 6 minutes. No melody, just tone, vibration, curved bowing that shifted like breath. Long, patient arcs of sound that felt more like a presence than a composition. When it ended, she didn't look up. Solari stood and bowed just slightly. Lyra winced. "Don't applaud," she said. "Just listen." "I am," Solari said. Her eyes flicked up, just for a second. But she didn't argue. Day 11. They played together. Not music, just response. Lyra on violin. Solari tapped rhythm against the old bulkhead. Slow, intentional knocks. A heartbeat, almost. Not loud, but consistent. Lyra's bow answered in kind. Not performance. Conversation. When it ended, neither of them said anything. Day 12. She packed the case. Tight, methodical. But before she zipped it shut, she pulled out a second photo. A new one. Just the station's window with the dying star at center frame. She tucked it beside the old one. Solari raised an eyebrow. "I don't play for them anymore," she said. "But maybe I'll play for myself, in spaces like this, where no one claps, where silence stays sacred." She paused. "You remind me of that." Solari tilted their head. Lyra shrugged. "It's the way you listen. It's like you're tuning something in me I forgot was still there." Day 13. Departure. She lingered at the airlock longer than necessary. The violin was on her back. Her hands didn't fidget. Solari stood beside her. "Don't tell anyone I was here," she said. "I won't." She looked down. "I've never played so honestly in my life." Solari didn't smile, but they reached into their pocket and handed her a note. It was just 3 bars, written by hand, a rhythm they'd tapped on day 10. Her eyebrows lifted. She tucked it into the case. "Thank you," she said, "for not asking. That's the kindest thing you did." She stepped aboard. The hatch sealed. Solari walked the corridor that night, found the bench empty, but a single rosin cake had been left behind, worn, smooth, and still warm from her fingers. They didn't move it, just sat beside it, and let the silence stretch for as long as it needed. Chapter 10. The couple who arrived separately. Solari noticed it immediately. 2 separate entries in the incoming manifest. 2 ships, 2 travelers, different arrival slots. nearly identical time windows, but both registered under the same departure origin, the Niara Vane Medical Colony, and both listed the other as their emergency contact. Solari didn't usually dig further into personal history, but this time curiosity nudged them. VS NALEMH, 71 former occupation. Interstellar transit chef stay, 13 days medical note. Pacemaker analog, mild balance instability notes. Traveling alone. KAIMARENH, 68 former occupation. Cargo route scheduler stay, 13 days medical note. Degenerative tremor, stable notes. Traveling alone. Nothing explicitly connected them beyond the contact fields. But Solari could read subtext better than most. They were together or had been. And something time, distance, maybe a falling out, had made that harder to say aloud. VS arrived first. A sharp-eyed woman with a long white braid and a storm gray jacket she didn't remove, even in the temperate corridor. She smiled politely, but it didn't reach her eyes. She moved like someone used to command, used to kitchens and chaos and discipline. "Stationkeeper," she greeted. "You run this place alone?" Solari nodded once. VS gave an approving grunt. Well kept, efficient, quiet. She set her small duffel down and looked around. Perfect. She didn't ask for a tour, didn't ask where things were. She just found the kitchen pod, surveyed the cabinets, and set herself to cooking immediately, pulling unfamiliar ingredients and working by instinct. Within 20 minutes, the air smelled of spiced root broth and roasted fungi. Solari lingered in the doorway. "You're welcome to some," she said without turning. Solari gave a small bow. VS set out 2 bowls. Kai arrived 12 hours later. He walked slowly, with a carved cane and warm brown eyes that never quite focused straight ahead. He wore layered shawls and soft shoes that didn't make a sound. His tremor was visible, but not disruptive. Just a quiet flutter in his fingers, like something remembering motion it could no longer sustain. When Solari met him at the dock, he gave a soft chuckle. "You don't ask questions, do you?" Solari tilted their head. "Don't worry," he said. "It's a gift." VS saw him the next morning. She was in the hydroponics garden, harvesting herbs she didn't recognize but decided to experiment with. Kai walked in, paused, and froze mid-step. So did she. They didn't speak, just looked at each other across the grow beds. Then VS turned back to her bundle of greens and resumed snipping. Kai walked away without a word. Solari, watching from the upper catwalk, said nothing. For 3 days they orbited each other, not avoiding, not confronting, just existing. VS cooked for herself. Kai read ancient novels from the station's library cube and sat near the star-facing window for hours at a time. Solari didn't press. But they noticed the way VS lingered after dinner, holding a second bowl that she didn't eat from. They noticed the way Kai carried his tea with 2 hands now, but still traced invisible letters into the steam as it rose. They noticed the way both of them watched the other when they thought they weren't being watched. On day 5, Solari left 2 mugs on the table. Nothing fancy, just citrus peel and ginger root steeped in silence. Kai arrived first. VS came in 10 minutes later. She hesitated at the threshold, then sat. They didn't speak at first, just sipped. Then Kai said softly, "This reminds me of the layover we had on Gone, the Prime. Do you remember?" VS didn't respond immediately, but her mouth pulled upward. "Barely. They oversteeped it," she said. "It was bitter as acid. You pretended to like it because the vendor had a nice laugh." Kai's shoulders dropped, ever so slightly. "You always notice things like that," he said. VS didn't look at him. "You always remembered." That evening, VS brought out a photo. It was creased and faded. 2 younger versions of themselves standing in a narrow ship galley, arms looped around each other, covered in flour. "I kept it," she said, not looking at him. "Even after everything." Kai didn't reach for it. He just nodded. So did I. Day 6 brought shared walks. Short ones. They still didn't hold hands. But their paces matched now. Their silences felt less brittle. Solari passed them in the garden once. VS gave them a look that almost meant thank you. On day 7, Kai had a tremor bad enough that he dropped a mug. It didn't shatter, it was synth glass, but the sound startled them all. VS rushed in from the other room and knelt beside him without hesitation. You okay? He nodded. His hands were clenched. She placed her own hand over his. Steady. Familiar. It's worse when I'm stressed, he murmured. She didn't let go. I know, she said. I didn't want to come here if you were here. I didn't either. Then why are we both here? VS looked at the spilled tea, at the mug that hadn't broken, at the place where his hands had once been stronger. Because neither of us wanted to die angry. They shared a meal with Solari that night. It wasn't about the food. It was about occupying the same space again. Not as lovers. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as people who once built a life. And maybe still could, in pieces. Day 9. Solari entered the common room to find them playing a board game neither had touched in decades. VS pretended not to be smiling. Kai didn't bother pretending. Day 10. They argued in the corridor. Not loudly, not cruelly, but real, familiar friction. And then they made up without needing words. Day 11. Kai brought VS a carved bead he'd made from a leftover station polymer, a poor substitute for wood, but shaped with care. She held it for a long time before placing it in her braid. Day 12. Solari watched them at the star window. No hands touching, but shoulders close. VS leaned her head gently against his for just a second. That was all. Day 13. Departure. They packed together. 2 duffels. 2 tickets. But when they walked to the dock, they both entered Kai's ship. VS didn't look back. But Kai did. He met Solari's gaze and offered the smallest bow. Sometimes, he said, you just need time without anyone asking if you're okay. Solari inclined their head. You gave us that, VS added. Solari didn't speak. Didn't need to. The hatch closed. The station was quiet again. But this time it felt like something had been repaired, not removed. Chapter 11. The child who knew the star's name. Solari knew something was unusual the moment the pod decelerated. It was too small. Not in size, standard two-berth, Class 7 pod, but in weight, movement, distribution. The station sensors reported the same as their instincts did. 1 passenger. Light body mass. No adult biosignatures detected. Solari frowned. They moved to docking bay C just as the pod finished pressurizing. The hatch hissed open. A small figure stood inside. A child. No older than 10, if that. With frizzy, sun-gold hair tied back in 5 unruly plaits and a hand-me-down ship jumpsuit patched in dozens of colors. She blinked at the stationkeeper with enormous eyes the color of lunar glass and grinned like someone seeing a familiar face in a dream. Hi, she said. I'm Alexi. Solari stared. Where is your? Oh, she's dead, Alexi said cheerfully. She told me not to be sad, so I'm not. I'm on a memory tour. Solari blinked. The girl stepped forward, hands on her hips. You're Solari, right? The station keeper? I have a note. She held out a paper, crumpled and folded 4 times. Solari opened it. The handwriting was uneven, faded in places, clearly written during illness or pain, but unmistakably real. Solari, if you're reading this, I'm gone. My daughter Alexi will be taking this trip alone. This is what I promised her. She's bright, careful, and more capable than most adults I've met. Please treat her as a guest, not as a problem. She's visiting the places I once told her stories about. I believe she'll be safest in your care. Thank you. Lara Neve. Solari reread the signature. They remembered Lara. Faintly. A a trader who passed through twice more than 5 years ago. She had asked for extra sugar cubes and spent 2 full evenings talking about constellations with an old surveyor who couldn't remember his own name. Solari looked back at the child. Alexei grinned wider. So, do I get a room? They gave her pod 3. She hung up a drawing immediately. A lopsided version of the station, surrounded by comets shaped like fish. She unpacked her single bag, pulled out a journal, and set up her plush toy, a knitted creature somewhere between a bat and a cat, at the foot of her bed. Then she wandered the station like she owned it. Solari didn't try to stop her. The station had no dangerous zones. Everything sharp or mechanical was locked. Nothing vented into vacuum anymore. Even the wiring was self-sealed. And she was careful. More careful than she seemed. She asked before touching anything. She didn't press random buttons. She read labels aloud and sometimes double-checked them twice. She found the kitchen but didn't use the stove. Just boiled noodles in the reheat kettle and ate them with cheese dust. She sat in the garden and hummed to the plants. She found the library cube and chose books at random. One on mining rigs. One on love poems. One on alien languages she didn't understand but tried to mimic. At one point, she looked up at the ceiling camera and said, "Are you watching me?" Solari blinked at the monitor. "Good," she said. "It's nice." At dinner, she sat across from them at the communal table. Solari didn't usually eat with guests, but she had set a tray for 2 without realizing it. Alexei twirled her noodles. "My mom said the star outside your window is called Last Ember. Did you name it?" Solari shook their head. "She did," Alexei said proudly. "She said you showed her the way the gravity curls around it. She said it's dying slowly but beautifully." Solari nodded. "She told me she'd come back someday. I guess she didn't make it." She looked down at her bowl. "Are you sad about that?" Solari paused, then nodded once. Alexei smiled again, gentler now. "Me too." The next morning, Solari found her sitting on the floor outside pod 3 with a schematic pad and a stylus. "What are you doing?" She showed them. It was the star. She had drawn it. Not perfectly, not scientifically, but the shape of it. The amber flare, the thinning corona, the slow pulse was unmistakable. "My mom said it's the prettiest old thing in the sky. She told me to find it when I was lonely." She traced a spiral in the corner of the drawing. "I don't feel lonely here." Each day she adopted a new project. On day 3, she built a sculpture out of hydroponic crate lids and named it The Last Sneeze of a Dying Moon. On day 4, she tried to teach Solari how to skip silently. Solari failed. She laughed. On day 5, she recorded a story on the comm logs, even though it wasn't necessary. Just in case someone wants to hear a good story when they dock and you're busy. She titled it The Girl Who Made Soup from Gravity. Solari didn't interrupt. They listened later alone. On day 6, she asked for a memory cube. Solari gave her a blank one. She stared at it for a long time. "My mom's voice was on the last one, but I listened to it too much. It wore out. That happens, you know?" Solari did know. She didn't cry. Not then. Just sat on the floor, cross-legged, with the cube on her knees. "I think I'll record new ones. Not hers. Mine." By day 8, she had a routine. Morning, drawing. Afternoon, talking to the garden plants. Evening, dinner with Solari and a guest lecture, which was what she called her stories. Day 9's was about a jellyfish who fell in love with a spaceship. Day 10's was about a solar flare that learned to sing. Each one ended with a sentence Solari began to anticipate. And then it was okay again. Not the same, but okay. On day 11, she didn't come to breakfast. Solari checked the monitor. She was curled in her bed, holding the Batcat creature, eyes closed. They hesitated, then went in. She wasn't sick, just tired. "It feels heavy today," she mumbled. Solari didn't speak. They sat beside her and placed a small glass prism on the table. It split the sunlight across the wall in silent color. She smiled at it, then reached for Solari's hand. Day 12. She handed Solari a sealed envelope. It's for when I go. You don't have to open it now. Solari nodded. Then she added, you can if you're sad. Day 13. Departure. She packed slowly, checked every corner of the room to make sure she left nothing behind, then hugged Solari around the waist. Brief but fierce. Thank you for letting me be real here. Solari didn't trust their voice. They placed a drawing in her hand. One she'd made earlier, the star, but now annotated in their own handwriting with scientific notations. She lit up. Oh wow, it has a name and a chart. The pod sealed. The child waved. And then she was gone. Solari waited an hour before opening the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper, covered in sky blue crayon. It said, Dear Solari, thank you for knowing how to listen without words. That's the kindest kind. I'm gonna name a planet after you someday. Love, Elixir. P.S. The star does sound like it's singing if you listen long enough. I think it's lonely too. Solari sat alone in the common room that night. The silence wasn't heavy. It was listening. Chapter 12. The Stranger Who Remembered Solari's Name. The pod docked at 16:07 local station time. Solari watched the readout with habitual distance. Same class, same signature, nothing unusual. But when the hatch opened, something shifted. The man who stepped out didn't look remarkable. He wore an old spacer jacket, black with silver trim at the cuffs. His boots were scuffed. His hair was streaked gray at the temples, but clean. He looked around like he was scanning for ghosts. Then his eyes landed on Solari, and he smiled, slow, startled, and strangely fond. Still here, he said. Solari's heart stuttered. Hello, Solari. His name was Tazin. That detail arrived slowly, carried on the tide of memory. Solari didn't remember everything, just impressions. A voice, slightly rough from too much recycled air. A warmth that had lingered too long after a shared drink. An argument near the observation deck. A goodbye that was meant to be temporary but never reversed course. He'd been here before. A long time ago. Before the rules. Before the silence. I wasn't sure you'd still be alive, Tazin said casually, setting down his duffel. Stations like this get forgotten. Solari said nothing. Tazin looked around the docking bay with a slow smile. Same floors. Same hum. He took a breath. I thought about this place. More than I should have. They assigned him Pod 2. He unpacked quickly, efficiently. No fuss. Then he wandered the station like a man tracing the edges of a once familiar dream. He didn't press Solari with questions. Not at first. Just watched them the way one watches something breakable. Or something that once broke you. That night he made tea in the kitchen. Set out 2 mugs. Solari didn't sit, but didn't leave either. Tazin took a sip. You changed your hair. Solari blinked. You used to keep it longer. Tucked back, in a clasp. Solari hadn't worn a clasp in years. Tazin smiled faintly. Still remember. The station was quiet the next day. Tazin spent most of it in the library cube. Not reading, just sitting with a tablet in his lap and a thoughtful stillness that had always come before something important. Solari busied themselves with maintenance. Checked the seals. Calibrated the garden lights. Reorganized the storage bay. But the hum in their chest wouldn't quiet. At dinner, Tazin spoke. You ever think about leaving? Solari didn't answer. Didn't think so, he said softly. You were always good at staying. Day 3. He asked about the garden. Solari gave the facts. Hydroponic integration, root cycle filtration, nutrient balancing. He listened carefully. Then said, Still growing things even out here. It wasn't a question. Day 4. Solari found a note tucked beside the mug in the kitchen. It said, I'm sorry. Just that. No name. No explanation. But Solari knew what it meant, and how long it had taken to write. They left it there, untouched, but not unread. Day 5. He found the window overlooking the star. Last ember flared softly behind the shield glass, a wounded gold in an endless dark. Taysen sat cross-legged in front of it for hours. When Solari passed through, he looked up. She's dying slower than I thought. Solari nodded. Still beautiful. They nodded again. Taysen tilted his head. You ever name her? Solari hesitated. Then, she already had a name. Day 6. He cooked. Solari arrived at the kitchen to find something warm simmering. This used to be your favorite, he said. They didn't remember. He handed them a bowl anyway. Steam rose, fragrant, unfamiliar and oddly comforting. Solari took one bite and stopped. They did remember. The flavor was imperfect, slightly off, too much salt, but the memory behind it was precise. They sat down, across from him, and ate the whole thing. Day 7. He finally asked, what happened to them? Solari looked up from the console. The others, Taysen said. You used to live with people here. A crew, engineers, a little ecosystem. Solari's jaw tensed. You stayed when they left, or died, or changed. Why? A pause. Then, quietly, because I had to. Taysen nodded. Because you didn't know how to leave. Day 8. He gave them a gift, wrapped in an old scarf, a tiny star map cube, handmade, not digital, etched glass, lined with hand-drawn constellations. These were the ones you taught me, he said. Solari turned it over in their hands. I used to forget things, Taysen continued. A lot of things, but I never forgot this. A pause. I didn't forget you. Day 9. They walked the station together. No words, just steps, shared space, memories breathing in through the seams. At one point, Taysen touched the wall lightly. This place, it was your anchor. I never understood that. Not really. He looked at them. I do now. Day 10. Solari finally asked, why did you leave? Taysen didn't flinch. Because I was scared. Of what? Of how much I loved you. Day 11. He sat outside the garden, hands folded, looking older than before. He said, I thought I could come back and undo it. A breath. But time doesn't work like that. Solari nodded, then sat beside him. Day 12. He didn't talk, didn't cook, didn't make tea. Just stood beside the observation window and watched the star burn itself down. When Solari came near, he said, I thought I came back for closure, but maybe I just came back to say goodbye properly. They didn't stop him. They didn't speak, but they stayed. Day 13. Departure. He shouldered the duffel again, wore the same jacket, same boots, but he wasn't the same. He looked at Solari and said, you don't have to stay frozen. Not forever. A beat. You're allowed to begin again. The hatch hissed open. He paused. Maybe we'll meet again, in another orbit. Solari said nothing, but their hand lifted, briefly, a small wave. And for the first time in many years, they watched someone leave and felt something like closure. Not a wound reopening, but a scar closing completely. Later that night, they unwrapped the etched star map again, held it in the light, and whispered a name only they remembered. Chapter 13. The One Who Wouldn't Leave. The last pod of the cycle docked at 11:32. Solari didn't look up right away. They were calibrating the CO2 sensors in the inner corridor, a process that required patience, a firm touch, and no distractions. But the alert kept blinking. Visitor arrived. Slot confirmed. Auto-assignment pending. Nothing unusual, except for the way the system hesitated before logging her name, as if the station itself were unsure how to label her. She was tall, That was the first thing Solari noticed. Tall and barefoot and carrying no luggage at all. She stepped out of the pod with hands in her pockets and a wide-eyed stillness, like she hadn't seen a hallway in years. Solari watched her from the side of the corridor. The woman looked around, smiled slightly, then walked straight up to them and said, "You're Solari, right?" Solari blinked. "Nice to meet you," she said. "I'm Kira." She moved like she belonged, asked no questions, made no assumptions, just walked the station with a calm interest, studying each room like it was art. She spent an hour in the garden without speaking, another in the library, pulling out books she didn't read. At dinner, she arrived with a pouch of powdered soup and 2 bowls. Solari didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. Kira smiled anyway. "You don't talk much," she noted. "That's okay. I do." And she did. Day 2. She helped clean the solar filters. Didn't ask permission. Just appeared with gloves and a rag and started scrubbing beside Solari like she'd always been there. "You can tell a lot about a place by its dust," she said. Solari glanced sideways. "Some dust smells like salt, some like rot. Yours smells like ozone and tea leaves." She smiled. "I like it." Day 3. She moved her sleeping mat out of pod 5 and into the atrium. "Better sunlight," she said. Solari hesitated. "That's not allowed." Kira looked up from her pillow. "By who?" Solari opened their mouth. Closed it. Kira winked. Day 4. She followed them into the observation wing. Watched the dying star with her chin in her hands. "Looks like a bruised orange," she said. Solari frowned. "Too poetic?" They shook their head. "It's just not what most people say." Kira's smile turned wry. "I'm not most people." Day 5. She fixed the stuck panel in the west corridor. "Used to be a ship tech," she explained, banging the panel into place with her heel. "Till I wasn't." Solari tilted their head. "What changed?" She paused. "Then, I started wanting things." Day 6. Solari found her sitting in their favorite alcove, the one behind the hydroponic tanks where the sound of water masked all else. She was sketching. Not stars. Not maps. Not the station. Solari leaned closer. She was drawing them. Solari hunched over a console. Solari holding a mug. Solari sleeping against a wall. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I should have asked." Solari stared. Kira flushed. "I just wanted to remember you." Day 7. Solari woke to the smell of stew. Kira had scavenged root vegetables from the garden and brewed something warm and thick. "Cooking's a ritual," she said, "like praying or apologizing." They ate together in silence. At the end, Solari whispered, "Thank you." Kira smiled. "Worth it just to hear you speak." Day 8. She didn't check the date, didn't count the days. But Solari did. They always did. Day 9. She sang, softly, in the corridor, to herself. Solari listened from around the bend, unseen. The lyrics were nonsense, not a language Solari recognized. But the tone made something ache inside their chest. Day 10. She asked, "Why do they only stay 13 days? Solari replied, "It's a rule." Kira didn't blink. "But why that rule?" Silence. Then, "Because any longer, and it starts to hurt." Kira nodded. "I can see that." Day 11. She found the star map cube, picked it up from where Solari had left it, tucked behind the control console, half hidden under a cloth. "You know," she said, "you've got a whole galaxy of reasons to stay closed off." Solari looked away. "But you've let me in. Just a little. I don't take that lightly." Day 12. They walked together without speaking. Watched the last ember burn low. Kira looked solemn. "I'm supposed to leave tomorrow," she said. Solari felt their breath catch. "I won't, though." Solari turned sharply. "What?" I'm not leaving. Day 13. The pod readout blinked. Scheduled departure. 9 o'clock. Kira didn't show. At 10:30, the system pinged a violation. At 11:15, it prepared to send an alert. Solari manually overrode it, set the limiters to sleep, and sat down beside Kira in the atrium. I thought you didn't break rules, she said. Solari shrugged. I didn't know I was allowed to change them. Kira smiled. Later that night, they sat in silence. No pods, no countdowns, just warmth, presence, 2 cups of tea, and the unfamiliar shape of a future, not defined by solitude, but by someone who stayed. Another story ends, but the cozy never does. See you soon.